Long before shirts and pants existed, humans had to survive without modern clothing. The first problem was simple: staying warm, and bare skin could easily be scratched, cut, or burned. So humans needed something that could cover and protect their skin. One of the most useful materials was animal hide, but fresh hide was thick, stiff, and difficult to use. First, they had to make the hide softer. A sharp stone could scrape away unwanted material. Repeated scraping made the material cleaner and more flexible. But one piece of hide was not always enough to cover the body. They needed a way to connect those pieces. Plant fibers could be twisted together to make strong cords. The finished cord could act like primitive thread. But pushing a cord through thick hide with bare fingers was difficult. Then came a clever solution: a small pointed bone tool. The pointed tool could make a tiny hole in the hide. The cord could then pass through that hole. Hole by hole, the pieces could finally be stitched together. Piece by piece, those stitched hides could become a simple covering for the body. And that simple idea was one of the first steps toward clothing. But making one piece was only the beginning. People still had to figure out how the material should fit. A piece that was too large could get in the way, too small, and it wouldn't provide much protection. So the hide had to be cut into a more useful shape. The edges could be trimmed away. But cutting wasn't the only way to shape it. Natural materials could also be used around the edges. Sinew was especially useful because it was tough and flexible. It could make stronger stitches. Now the pieces could hold together more securely. But clothing wasn't only about animal hide. Some plants had long fibers that could be turned into useful material. Those fibers could be twisted, braided, or woven. Woven fibers created a completely different kind of covering. The pattern made the material flexible while keeping it together. So different environments could lead to different materials, and people could choose whatever worked best. Over time, these simple experiments became better techniques, and little by little, humans moved closer to making real clothing. Eventually, people learned that different materials behaved in different ways. Fur could help trap warmth close to the body. Hide could block wind and protect the skin. Plant fibers could make lighter coverings, so the material depended on what people needed. But even good materials could wear out, so repairs became important too. A repaired garment could last much longer. People could also make ties to keep coverings in place. A simple knot could hold a cord securely. That meant clothing didn't always need complicated fasteners. Sometimes the simplest solution was enough. Humans could also use natural pigments for color. Red ochre was especially common in prehistoric life. Pigments could be rubbed onto natural materials. So clothing could become more than just protection. It could also show identity, skill, or belonging. But the basic goal remained the same: survival. Protection came first. Style came much later. And from these simple materials, the story of clothing began. But there was still one huge problem: keeping the clothing attached to the body. A loose piece of hide could easily slip off, so people needed a way to secure the edges. A cord could be pulled tightly around the body. That simple tie could make a huge difference. Some coverings could simply be wrapped around the body. No complicated pattern was necessary. The shape could depend on what the person needed to protect. Hands and feet needed freedom to move, so clothing couldn't simply be wrapped too tightly. People also had to think about where seams should go. A badly placed seam could rub against the skin, so smoother edges could make the covering more comfortable. Different parts could be shaped differently too. That made movement easier, and protection could be improved without making everything heavier. Over generations, people could learn from what worked and what failed. Each improvement made the next piece easier to make, and eventually, simple coverings became recognizable clothing. What started as raw material had become something humans could actually wear. But clothing did not stop at simple coverings. Different body parts needed different kinds of protection. Feet needed protection from rough ground. A simple wrap could protect the lower legs. Shoulders and upper bodies needed another solution. Simple holes could also make attachment easier. The cord could pass through several holes. That made the edge much easier to secure. Some materials could also be layered. Layering could add warmth without changing the basic idea. Animal fur had another useful feature: insulation. Tiny air spaces could slow the loss of body heat. Wind protection was useful for a different reason. So the same piece of clothing could solve more than one problem. And humans could improve clothing based on experience. A better needle could mean faster stitching. A stronger cord could mean stronger seams. Small improvements could completely change the result. What began as simple protection became a useful technology. And that is how the first simple steps toward clothing may have begun. But early clothing probably looked very different from the clothes we know today. There were no factories producing perfectly shaped pieces. Every piece had to be prepared by hand. And that could take a lot of time. The material itself had to be chosen carefully. A thick hide could be tough, but also heavy. A thinner hide was easier to move, but it might not provide the same protection. So making clothing involved trade-offs. Warmth, strength, weight, and flexibility all mattered. And different climates changed what people needed. In colder places, thicker materials could be more useful. In warmer places, lighter coverings could make more sense. This meant there was never just one perfect first outfit. People experimented with whatever nature provided. Some attempts worked better than others, and failures taught people what to change. Over a very long time, these tiny improvements added up, and eventually humans had clothing that could be shaped, repaired, and reused. What began as a simple way to survive became a technology humans would keep improving for thousands of years. But there is an even more interesting question. How did humans know which materials would work? They could learn simply by handling what they found around them. If something was flexible, it could be easier to shape. If it tore easily, it probably wasn't useful for heavy-duty clothing. If it stayed strong while bending, that was much more promising. This kind of trial and error could slowly reveal what worked, and the same idea applied to fibers. A single thin fiber could break easily, but several fibers together could become much stronger. That simple discovery made cords much more useful. Cords could tie, pull, hang, and attach things. And that made them useful far beyond clothing. But for clothing, the cord had one especially important job. It could pull the edges together. That meant fewer gaps where cold air could enter. Small details like this could make primitive clothing much more effective. Another important challenge was moisture. Wet materials could become heavier and less comfortable, so drying and caring for materials mattered too. Every little technique made the final clothing more practical. Before clothing could protect anyone, people first had to understand the material itself. The outside of an animal hide was very different from the inside. The unwanted hair and tissue had to be removed depending on how the hide would be used. This left a cleaner surface that could be worked more easily, but raw hide could still become stiff as it dried. So flexibility had to be preserved. One way to improve a hide was to work it repeatedly. Repeated movement could make the material easier to bend. And flexibility mattered when clothing had to move with the body. A rigid covering could crack, tear, or restrict movement, so softness and strength had to be balanced. People also had to keep their stitching from pulling apart. A tighter stitch could spread the pulling force across the material. That reduced the chance of one tiny hole becoming a huge tear. This is why the tiny details of early clothing mattered so much. The tools were simple, but the ideas behind them were clever. A sharp edge removed material, a pointed tool created holes, and a strong cord joined the pieces. Together, those simple tools turned raw materials into something useful.